Congressman Gallagher, did you vote to override the president's veto of the NDAA?
I did, yes, sir.
Can you tell us why?
Well, particularly since we just suffered one of the worst cyber hacks in American history, this is the most significant piece of cyber legislation in American history. It has 26 of my Cyberspace Solarium Commission's recommendations included in the National Defense Authorization Act to include provisions that are directly relevant to the SolarWinds hack that would have allowed us to get ahead of this, most notably by allowing CISA, the cyber division at DHS, to begin hunting for threats on .gov networks. We have other recommendations to enhance our cyber resiliency for our nuclear command and control systems in the NDAA, establishing a national cyber director in the NDAA, strengthening CISA at DHS, elevating its leadership, giving it more resources. I fear that the SolarWinds attack is a harbinger of things to come, but I'm very proud of the work our commission has done. And again, these provisions are absolutely critical. And so that's one big reason why I voted. Also, as an intellectual matter, I just think if you voted for the underlying bill, you should support the veto override. The bill didn't change from when we voted on it for the first time. I'm not sure intellectually I understand the case for voting for the bill and then voting against it. The final thing I'd say, Hugh, is that this is probably the most serious piece of legislation when it comes to deterring China that we've had in decades, if not ever, including provisions such as the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, building on the success of our European Deterrence Initiative to enhance our presence and our deterrent posture in Indo-PACOM, provisions protecting against Chinese industrial espionage, more transparency for Chinese military companies, reporting on Chinese United Front Work Department in the United States and abroad. The list goes on and on. This is a very serious piece of legislation when it comes to deterring China. And as I'm sure you agree, China is our number one threat and will be so for decades to come. And so this is very important, and I'm very proud of the work we did in the National Defense Authorization Act.
This is the last live show of 2020, and I was lying awake late last night, worrying actually, because Jake Sullivan gave an interview to NPR yesterday. I think he's a very smart and worthy successor from the Democratic side to our friend Ambassador O'Brien, who's the current National Security Advisor. But he made some allegations about China policy under President Trump, which are not accurate, suggesting that China policy was driven by concerns for investment banking relationship. In fact, President Trump's team has brought reality to the CCP. It's brought an American understanding to the CCP. Do you fear for that understanding in a Biden-Harris administration, Congressman Gallagher?
I do. Quickly, I did not see Sullivan's claim, but I think it's absurd on its face. I mean, if anything, this administration has just recently enhanced provisions when it comes to investments in Chinese companies and the ways Chinese companies are allowed to list in our markets, sometimes subverting or eliding entirely the same reporting requirements that we subject our own American companies to. So certainly that does not serve the interests of bankers on Wall Street who may want to make a quick buck investing in shady Chinese companies. And so I think the facts just don't support that allegation at all, in addition to what we've done to enhance the requirements for investments in the thrift savings plan, federal retirement benefits, so that they can't be invested in Chinese military companies. So I think that argument falls flat. And I do, as I said before in your program, Hugh, think that Sullivan and others in the Biden administration are really going to have to make an important decision early on that will shape their entire grand strategy and their approach to China. And if indeed they believe that our number one threat geopolitically is climate change, then that will lead them in an entirely different direction than what we have done over the last 4 years in a bipartisan manner, mind you, because our grand strategy was based on the idea that states themselves, not transnational issues, were the primary threat geopolitically, foremost among them China. And so I just very much worry that a lot is going to be sacrificed at the altar of climate change, and it's going to lead, particularly with John Kerry in this very undefined and amorphous role, it's going to lead to a contradictory policy. It's going to lead to a unrealistic policy, and it's ultimately going to lead towards a dangerous policy where we surrender a lot of the gains that we've made over the last 4 years.
Now, Congressman Gallagher, I began reading yesterday your colleague Michael Waltz's book, Warrior Diplomat. And it begins in 2009 when he has left the staff of Vice President Cheney and returned to special operators in Afghanistan. And the destructive impact of the first major decision of the Obama administration, which was to announce a surge and a withdrawal at the same time, undercutting the effects of the surge in Afghanistan. Do you expect any sort of precipitous mistake of that magnitude out of Biden-Harris in their first 6 months?
Well, it's possible, particularly if the CCP perceives that it has the geopolitical breathing space to do something stupid. I know people tend to scoff at the idea of a military invasion of Taiwan, but something like that is not off the table. Certainly, North Korea has proven its willingness time and again to test the limits of American patience and power. And so I think faced with a crisis like that, they might back down. And certainly we've seen over the last year when President Trump took action to take Qasem Soleimani off the battlefield, for example, Biden and his aides were quick to blame the United States for subsequent escalation. They were quick to blame the United States when the Iranians shot down a commercial airliner and tragically killed hundreds of their own citizens and foreign citizens. And so certainly in the Middle East, I fear that once they try to get back into the Iran deal and put it back together with duct tape, we're going to see a resurgent Iranian regime that will run roughshod over the entire region. And in that scenario, Hugh, the irony will be that Biden's foreign policy will fall victim to the exact same fate that Obama's is, which is that any well-intentioned effort to pivot to the Indo-Pacific will fail because they'll get sucked back into a very chaotic Middle East because they will misunderstand the fundamental dynamics in that region, and they will walk away from our traditional alliance structure and seek some sort of misguided rapprochement with Iran.
Now, I want to close by talking with you about Team Biden. They do not seem intellectually attached to appeasement in the way that Team Obama was. And by that, I mean President Obama had a deep faith in walking away from American primacy. He was committed to that. He believed in the Iran deal. Joe Biden's been around a long time, including in the Vietnam War, including watching the collapse of Cambodia into barbarism, including the rise of China, including the fall of the Soviet Union. I don't think he is naive in the way that President Obama is. Do you share my optimism?
I think you're right to suggest that Obama was ideologically committed to isolationism and skeptical of American leadership of the free world in a way that Biden isn't. However, and this is a big however, over the course of 5 some odd decades in public office, Biden has repeatedly demonstrated terrible judgment when it comes to geopolitics on key issues. And so I think that's what makes me most concerned. And I do think it's fair to say, Hugh, that the Democratic Party as a whole, and Biden will face these pressures, is committed fanatically to certain things. I mentioned climate change before, but I think all of it can be put in the broader debate over identity politics, a debate which is shaping key personnel choices right now. And I think that's really going to inject tension into their foreign policy approach. And we're going to get a test over the next 4 years as to whether identity politics can survive geopolitics.
Very well put. Last question. Will you be voting for the waiver for General Austin?
I will not be voting for the waiver for General Austin. I recently wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. I'm surprised you didn't devote an entire show to covering that op-ed. Meanwhile, you're reading Waltz's book. I didn't even know Waltz could read, let alone write a book.
Army Marines.
Yeah. So, no, I think, one, we learned some lessons from the Mattis experiment. 2, when you do this 2 times in a row in very short succession, it does erode civil-military relations. 3, General Austin, despite a brilliant career that I look up to very much and personal integrity, brings to the job primarily experience with Central Command in the Middle East when the job requires experience with the CCP and Indo-PACOM. But for more, you can read my op-ed on the Wall Street Journal about.
I'll have to go find that. Whenever I see Gallagher, I'm afraid it's Packers propaganda, so I avoid it. So now that I know it's not Packers propaganda, I will go find it. Congressman Gallagher,